Today's COVID update is brought to you by Fulltech Systems, your technology center, where you'll come for the price but stay for the service.
And welcome back. We have been joined on set as promised by the Minister of Home Affairs and New Growth Industries. The Honorable Kareem Musa is in the building with us this morning. And there's a range of questions we're going to be putting to him. I'm certain that over the past few weeks, as we've been covering the news, you've been familiar with some of the concerns and the issues that are coming up with his particular ministry. And so we'll be getting to that in our discussion this morning. First of all, good morning, Minister.
Hi, good morning, Isani, and good morning, Marlene. Thanks for having me on today.
Certainly. Let's jump right into it, Minister. I think arguably the most pressing issue at this point is the developments within the Belize Police Department. Over the past 4 weeks or so, we've seen illicit activities happen where police officers are allegedly involved. And not only does it give a black eye on the department as a whole, but it raises serious concerns in terms of security, in terms of the degree of involvement of these officers in these illicit activities. And by illicit activities, we're talking primarily drug trafficking. I could recall a retiree was found with a brick of cocaine upon leaving from the training academy of all places, right? And then there's allegations of officers who landed one on the Southern Highway. There's another allegation of officers who were purportedly involved in another landing in the Mountain Pine Ridge area, and it goes on and on. Let's begin there.
Yeah, just as a point of clarification, though, Isani, when you say a retiree, it is not a recently retired police officer. Fair enough. The one instance. He has long been retired from the department, many years. But you certainly have a point there that over the last year, with the police department doing such an exceptional job in catching planes, we are unearthing what all of us have known all along, which is that security service personnel are involved in these plane landings. And Belize is no different. Let us start there. Whenever there is a bust in Belize, you could check our neighboring countries, Guatemala and Mexico. Likewise, security personnel in those countries are arrested as well. And so the cartel has a formula, and that formula includes enlisting the employment of security personnel, whether it is the military, whether it's police officers. And so those are the individuals sought out by the cartels to do these landings, to facilitate these landings. And so I try to look at it from a more positive perspective, Isani, and that is of the last 4 plane landings, we have foiled one because we were waiting for it on land, but it ended up in the sea. And we are fairly certain that a pilot lost his life in that crash landing. And then the other 2, the one at Bladen and the one at Mountain Pine Ridge, we not only got all of the drugs, but we also caught the culprits. And again, it might be a tough pill to swallow to learn that in fact there were police officers or security service personnel involved with these landings, but I, as minister, I certainly feel proud of the officers who made the bust and who made the arrests. And that is the perspective where I look at it, because we always know this. This is something that has been going on for many years. And so our success rate in terms of capturing the drugs and capturing the culprits, I think, is excellent so far.
Let me put this to you as a quick follow-up. As the minister, don't you find yourself in sort of a quagmire in the sense that you're also an attorney, and so you have first-hand knowledge of how the laws work. So you have officers who are alleged to have participated in these activities. You see charges being brought against them, and in many cases, these officers end up being exonerated from these matters. However, they go back into the service because while they're on interdiction, they're on half pay or whatever, when they're cleared of the charge, they go back to work. But while we know that there's, well, what is called a factual guilt, and being able to prove that in court, for the most part, we know that these people are involved, but we can't really put them on the hook.
Yeah, and that's one of the key differences, Isani, that you will find in our administration when you compare it to the last administration. And not to deviate much, but just to give as an example, I lost my good friend Allison Major at the hands of a police officer. That police officer was tried. He still is on trial for the killing of Allison Major. But when you look at how the police department handled it back then, they never charged him internally. And that is a key difference, and I'll tell you why. Because all of these officers who are being charged with these plane landings, not only are they being charged in a court of law, but they're being charged internally. And if based on the evidence, whether it's circumstantial or direct evidence, well, if that evidence is strong enough at the tribunal, we can take actions as a department to ensure that those officers do not return into our force. And as you saw the other day, about 4 weeks ago, Corporal Martinez, the officer accused of shooting Larry Gillett, the tribunal has found him guilty, but they did not necessarily sanction him to the point of dismissing him. The Commissioner of Police has that authority, having found him guilty at the tribunal, to then overrule and then to dismiss him, and that has been done. So there is an actual procedure, a process that has to take place in terms of rooting out and weeding out the corrupt rogue officers in the department, and we are exercising and employing all our efforts under that procedure, under the Public Service and Security Service regulations.
I want to come back to the issue that we are seeing with the now confirmed inclusion of security personnel in the drug trafficking trade. Did you at any point suspect that involvement could potentially involve such top-level officials?
When you say top level, what do you mean? Because you may be incriminating somebody who's not necessarily tied to it. If you're talking about corporals or sergeants, if that is what you're referring to, I would say yes. I would say that I consider everybody a suspect when it comes to these plane landings. And I've said that time and time again, that this, in each instance, has to be an ongoing investigation. We cannot close the book just because we have charged a few officers means that we have closed any investigation. And so we must continue with our investigation. Like I had mentioned, police officers at the last scene of the landing on Bladen had found cell phones, and so they are currently in the process of retrieving data from those 4 cell phones. And if any other officer is incriminated, then of course we will bring charges against those officers. And so it's not limited. We don't think that it's just police constables or corporals or sergeants. It could possibly go all the way to the top.
And I understand your need for being cautious because the matter is still under investigation. But let's push this a bit further in the hypothetical. When strategizing to be able to mitigate the landing of these planes, you must have a core team of persons involved within the ministry itself. What type of vetting takes place to ensure that these persons are in fact as far removed as possible from any linkages to these activities? So
the unit that is actually responsible to address plane landings, there are several teams that go out, but the unit who directs the traffic, so to speak, is the Anti-Narcotics Unit, the ANU. That unit goes through a very rigid screening process, vetting process, that includes a lie detector test. You have to pass lie detector tests, and you have to meet a certain standard to be able to get into this anti-narcotics unit, who works very closely with the DEA here in Belize. And so that is the unit that has coverage, that actually investigates, and they're the ones who are investigating the 2 plane landings, the one at Bladen and the one at Mountain Pine Ridge. And I want to say this because a lot of people don't know it. It is because of the intelligence that is gathered by these units that police officers stayed out in Mountain Pine Ridge, for days, because everybody is saying, oh, the drugs already left, the pilot done left. 1 day later, they found the pilot, the injured pilot, and then the day after they found the loot. And so it is that persistence based on intelligence that we're gathering from the ANU that's directing this traffic, that we were able to stick it out you know, in that rough terrain out there in Mountain Pine Ridge to ensure that we got not just the criminals caught, but also the drugs.
Let me ask a quick question here, just to continue from where you're leaving off. So you've mentioned that the anti-narcotics unit is primarily charged with responding via intelligence to plane landings and what have you. But there has been consistent talk that the former operations commander, his team was also responding to drug plane landings. This would be the commander of operations strike team. Isn't it a situation where you're having two groups, one that is sanctioned to do just that, and another that's operating under the command of the assistant commissioner to do the same? You'd have two groups converging on one scene. Doesn't that create an issue?
It may create an issue, Isani, but let me explain once again. There are several layers to this. So I explained to you the anti-narcotics unit, which works closely with the DA. But there's also the Joint Intelligence Operations Center. Now, that is the overall command center that deals with these plane landings, that has the radar from the point where it leaves Colombia or Venezuela and tracks the plane. And so there's a lot of coordination that takes place, a lot of intelligence that's gathered. And then there are these strike teams that I think you're referring to. Currently, we have one that is manned by Officer Greenidge. He is now the operations commander. Current ACP Vidal was the operations commander. Now ACP Greenidge is that operations commander. So there has been a switch, and now that falls on the responsibility of Mr. Greenidge, who goes out physically to go after these individuals. So they're on the ground itself.
Now, Minister, I know you're aware, as the commandant of the Coast Guard said right here on this show, that as a member of this joint team, they now have concerns about the information sharing that is taking place. They have to look out for their own integrity of their organization, and given all that has unfolded in the past few weeks, naturally they're hesitant to do so. What's your perspective on this?
I find the comments to be a little unfortunate because, like I mentioned, it's not just police officers that are suspected to be involved in facilitating these plane landings. We have other security service personnel. You could recall the one earlier this year that we caught up the river in the Belize River Valley. There was the driver who is a BDF for the Brigadier General. And so there are other security officers involved, and so we cannot cast this blame against one security service department. Like I mentioned earlier, the cartels enlist any number. So whether it's Coast Guard or whether it is BDF or whether it's police, they would enlist these security officers. And so information sharing between departments has to go on, has to take place. And as far as I'm aware, the commissioner has updated me that he and Mr. Bennett have had a conversation, have had a meeting since, and they have agreed that it has to continue, that the sharing of information, because currently the Coast Guard is in charge of GIOC. So they are the heads. So in terms of enforcement, they have to relay that information to police. So I think it was unfortunate that he made those comments, because there has to be that unison. We have to work together.
Unfortunate, but perhaps a bit understandable, because there is an absolute broken trust.
Like I say, we can do that both ways, but I don't think that is necessary. We can say the same about other security service personnel, but there's no use in going about it that way.
Let's touch on the issue of the former commander of operations. He is scheduled to return from personal leave sometime soon, but a recommendation would have by then been put forward to the Security Services Commission for his suspension. What can you share with us in respect of your knowledge of what's been going on with ACP Vidal?
Well, as has been said time and time again, I think this is important to say, in terms of the criminal investigation, there is nothing that links ACP Vidal to the landing at Bladen. So that is essential for us to make that point. But we have to understand that there appears to have been administrative failures on his part. It cannot be that your entire strike team is out there facilitating the landing of a plane. As commander, did you know where your personnel were? As commander, how did they get these rifles if they are government issued rifles? As commander, how did they get these vehicles? So there appears to be certain administrative failures. I cannot go into in-depth information on that, but as far as I'm aware, that internal investigation has wrapped up. It will be forwarded now this week, I am told, to the CEO, who will then forward it to the Security Service Commission requesting the suspension of ACP Vidal. So that is as far as I can go in terms of that investigation.
Well, separating from that issue, I think this has always been a question. One, if you are not actively on duty, you should not have possession of your rifle, vehicle, and there should be some sort of log returning system.
Absolutely. And that is the type of administrative failure that this internal investigation was focusing on. And in particular, Officer Na was found in possession of ammunition that he ought not to have since he was off duty. So that again, on Elmer Na's part, is an administrative failure, and on the part of his superior, which is ACP Vidal, if that is the case.
You would accept, however, and it's a question that I've put to other lawyers who have found crafty ways of batting it down, but you would accept that this situation presented somewhat of a catch-22 for ACP Vidal, right? Because the idea or the question of complicity becomes a part of this. If you know and you don't do anything, perhaps you equally as guilty or culpable. If you did not know, when it's your responsibility to know, then you're asleep at the wheel. So either way, you're facing some kind of a sanction.
Yes, exactly, Sani. And that is what we're referring to as acts of omission on his part, being the superior officer in this instance. It's just that one particular route does not entail a criminal charge, whereas the other, you may be disciplinary charge within the police department. So that is the route that we're looking at.
But let's look at this for what it is. A major black eye for the police department.
See that you all say that time and time again.
At a time. Well, I mean, when you were in
opposition. Do you not agree?
But can I just say this? When you were in opposition, you said the same.
Yes, it was, because we didn't catch them.
Let's look at this for what it is. Yes. And I think that no matter who is at the helm, whatever minister is in charge, I think people have expectations of what the police department should represent. And any time that image is broken, people we all as the public say, well, what else is going on? Yeah. So I want to use that as the jumping point to say, how do you restore in the public the fact that there is an active campaign to be able to weed out persons who are involved in any form of illegal activity, from police brutality to drug trafficking?
Yeah. One of the first things that I said when we're taking office, Marlene, because we knew that all these issues existed, but we had to address them, and there is a procedure we have to follow in terms of rooting out these police officers. But restoring the public confidence is absolutely one of my biggest objectives as Minister of Police. And it's unfortunate that in order for it to get better, it must first get worse. I had a constituent meet me over on Friday when I was by Lopez Mateos Park. And he gave me a very neat analogy. And he said, you know what, Minister? It's like we had all these symptoms. We're vomiting, we're bleeding for years. 13 years, let's just use the 13 years as an example. We're vomiting all this while we don't go to the doctor, you know. But when we do go to the doctor after 13 years, after all these symptoms, and the doctor says, I've done exams, I've done tests on you, and they are showing that you have cancer. That is what the results are showing. What does a patient normally do then? They then turn around, oh no, I have cancer, man, and then start blaming the doctor for pointing out all of the issues that they have recognized and that the doctor, is dealing with. That is what we're facing right now. We have diagnosed the problem, we have identified the culprits, at least some of them, and we are addressing it. So I understand what you're saying perfectly, that it's a black eye, but we are actually unearthing this evidence. We are actually catching them in the act. Unlike the last administration, which planes were just landing at whim and drugs were moved to America. And so I want to continue to reiterate that I, as minister, look at it from a different perspective, that we are looking at the problem, we found it, identified it, and we're treating it. And we are addressing these issues within the police department and weeding them out.
Allow me to piggyback on that analogy that you're using. So we're describing a tumor here, right? The cancer itself. That spreads over time if untreated. So we're looking at a systematic failure within the department, because if the cell was there that was undiagnosed over the 13 years, it has only grown. And by it growing, you would assume that it has reached certain, in this case, ranks within the department. If it's growing exponentially, then you're going to notice that it's going to go from the lower ranks, those who are the police constables and the corporals, to maybe the higher ups, as you're saying.
Yeah, well, that's why it's important to extract. Similar to a cancer, Isani, you have to extract it. And so once we identify it, we extract it. If there is information, it has spread to other parts of the department, we have to focus there as well and extract as well. It's going to take time, but I can already see a difference, Isani, in terms of me as minister starting out November 16th last year. 1 year later, I can personally see a difference. I can see a difference in the new crop of police officers that are coming out. Squad 95, which will graduate in just 2 weeks on December 17th. I am excited because this is the first group of individuals, 225 of them. All of them have high school or higher. Some of them have bachelor degrees, associate degrees. All of them passed their exams. So it wasn't based on any ministerial intervention and say, hire this one for me, hire that one for me. And they didn't have that very basic discipline or learning or understanding. And so I have a lot to be thankful for as minister, that I didn't get that type of pressure from my colleagues to say, listen, the 225 guys, let me just load it up with all our cronies per se. We didn't do that. We're doing things differently, and that's why I have a lot of hope. And that represents, Isani, 10% of the entire police population, because we only have 2,200 officers. So that's a huge injection of educated young men and women that will be representing the police department, and can definitely turn this page where we're looking at the past and rooting them out and dealing with it as we move forward.
How bound are you by the Public Service Act in terms of being able to weed out the so-called rogue officers? I know that perhaps you're confined to a great extent from being able to carry out what you would call as the extraction process.
Well, we are all bound by it, Isani, but the point remains, under the Police Act, the Commissioner of Police does have the authority to overrule any sanction that may be imposed by the internal tribunal if finding somebody guilty. That does not mean that is the end of the process, because even when a commissioner dismisses a particular police officer, that officer has the right to appeal. That is natural justice, and we have to respect that process. So they will appeal to the Belize Advisory Council, and then we see where it goes from there. But we feel very firm in our commitment that we are doing the right thing in all of these instances.
I just want to circle back before we move on from this. There's so much more to discuss. I hear it very often from yourself, from your commissioner, that in fact you see the detection of the planes that have landed as a marker of success. But what is this the marker that you are using? What's the comparison that you make to give yourself that pat on the shoulder to say we're doing better now?
You have to understand, Marlene, our geographical size as a country. We are wide open compared to those other more populated, densely populated communities in Guatemala, in Mexico. We are wide open geographically, and so there's a lot of open space where these landings can take place. We have very limited personnel, like I mentioned, 2,200 police officers. Of course, only a very small fraction of that is dedicated at night to be chasing planes. And so we have a lot to be thankful for with such a huge geographical size, with such limited personnel, to know that of the last 4 plane landings, we have successfully, I would say, dealt with 3 of them. So to me, that is a huge success. I don't like to compare myself or our work as a department to the last administration because they barely caught any planes. And the ones that they did caught, they did not even realize. They were clueless to the fact that 4 military personnel lay dead at the bottom of the sea, and they were having a press conference. So that just goes to show the level of their disorganization when dealing with plane landings. And so I don't like to compare to them, but at the same time, I feel that we have been having great success. And to think of it, it's not necessarily an issue for Belize. We're fighting an issue that's for the United States, because those drugs are not destined for here. They're destined for the United States, but we at the same time have an international obligation to do the best that we can to secure our borders and to secure our territory. And that's exactly what, in my opinion, we've been doing to the best of our ability, given the limited resources.
Will you be updating the public, as you said, that the investigation into the last incident and the involvement of Vidal, will you be doing a public update as to your findings?
Of course. Like I said, during the course of this week, we are expecting the internal investigation to be delivered to the CEO of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And from there, the request then goes to the Security Services Commission. In terms of the investigation itself and the findings, I believe that is information that should be public knowledge. And so I think we can share that with you once we have it.
Okay. Yeah.
Let's look at other areas within the police department. I know you've mentioned the new the new intake, that will be passing out in 2 weeks. What other strengthening measures are being put? I know, one, the public image is something that you're going to have to work on continuously. That is one aspect. What other areas are there that you're looking at to be able to strengthen the capacity of the police department, given all the challenges and restrictions it's facing?
Well, one of the things that we have certainly done as a new administration is to implement greater community policing efforts. And we are already seeing the benefits of that. ACP Rosado has been working very closely with me for the last 8 months or so, at a time when our Prime Minister and the Minister of Economic Development and their economic team was dealing with our blue bonds, was addressing the economic situation. We as a department have been strategizing, forming partnerships with the Leadership Intervention Unit. And so we are seeing greater dividends today now more than ever. And I'm happy to say that tomorrow will be exactly 1 month since we had the last gang-related shooting in Belize City. I think that took place on Vernon Street on November 7th. And so what we have done is we have teamed up with the Ministry of Youth. Minister Kevin Bernard is fully on board. The Ministry of Human Development, Minister Dolores is fully on board. And a cadre of other ministers uniting with the Leadership Intervention Unit to implement this multi-sectoral approach to addressing crime, particularly on the south side of Belize City. I saw your news station did excellent coverages, I think, for 2 nights on this particular phase 1 of this project, which is getting these young men to be more civic-minded, cleaning up their community for a small stipend. It's going a very long way because a lot of these young men just want that opportunity in life. They've been neglected and abandoned for so long, whether by their families or whether by politicians, to just know that they can earn a dignified living. And at the same time, cleaning up their community is an excellent initiative. It's some 230 of them that are actually working. But it doesn't just stop there. That's just the start of it, because there's a lot of healing that actually has to take place, a lot of therapy. And so the second phase of this, which starts next week, we're taking in groups of 50 to Mountain Pine Ridge for a 1-week counseling, what you would call healing process, really, for these young men, because they're going to be given skills training in various skills, entrepreneurial skills, and of course conflict resolution, which is huge. And we're actually working very closely as part of this project with the University of Belize and some of their students. So I'm very thankful, and I want to thank them for reaching out to the Leadership Intervention Unit to work along with us in terms of this violence interruption. Because moving forward, you know, we have to interrupt violence before it erupts. I know traditionally, in years gone by, we would wait until violence erupts, then bring all these very angry men together and try to mediate. That's not the time for us to mediate, because they're all angry with each other. It's a very volatile situation. And so it's a step-by-step process to have these individuals, these trainers and these social scientists actually on the ground, engage with these young men to interrupt violence even before it rears its ugly head. So that is kind of the strategy that we're implementing. And so far, there's been goodwill on the part of the police department. The Belize City Council has been doing a great job with us as well. And like I said, all the other ministries. And of course, these young men and women who are just seeking out an opportunity. And so they've expressed goodwill as well in terms of this process at this point in time.
Yeah. And what's the support like from other ministries as well? As you are aware, very often these are the breadwinners for households.
Yes.
So removing them for anything, state of emergency or counseling session, that takes away source of income.
Yes. Well, the support we've gotten from the other ministries has been exceptional. Like I said, the Ministry of Youth and Sports is fully engaged. We have the Director of Youth Services, Mr. Kevin Cadle, who is on the front line with Mr. William Dawson of the LIU, and of course with ACP Rosado. And so it's sort of like a real combining of efforts. Everybody coming together, realizing this huge problem and trying a different approach and a different strategy, which, like I said, I think it's been something that we have preached for a long time in opposition.
Yeah.
I know time and time again, this is something that I called for as a member of the opposition, and I'm just glad to be a part of it, to see that there are others who believe in this process and believe that it can work out for the greater good.
But it does take time.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
that's perhaps one of the things that you will find yourself in the near future having to remind people.
Yes, yes.
Because while you do the intensive work of trying to rehabilitate people, there will be crimes that will happen in the meantime.
Of course.
So it's dual enforcement while you try to mitigate.
It is moving forward going to be an issue, because you cannot eradicate crime altogether. We're not naive to think so. But certainly if we're able to reduce the number of crimes and to rehabilitate a number of these individuals, then I could say we can claim success after a period of time. And so there will be slippages. There will be times when there will be a murder. We have to expect that. It's not an overnight shift like you're saying, Marlene. And so we know that it's a long walk back. It's a long journey back, because it's been years and years, like I've said time and time again, from the 90s of having 4 gangs, we're now to 28 gangs. And so the reform and rehabilitation process is going to take time. As much time as it took to build it there, we'll have to walk it back and get these young men, like I said, opportunities that they so need, land that they so need. These are things that they've never been given, like I said, whether by family or politicians. And that's why this new approach is refreshing for them, because they can see now there is actual hope. So I'm in it for the long haul. I know that there will be slippages over time, but at the same time, we are committed, and we will not let those slippages deter us.
Now, let me just, as we quickly run out of time, I want to touch on some other things. We started our show this morning talking about some of the developments in the House. One of it is the constituency development program,
Yes.
what some are saying the PUP version of Christmas cheer. So on a point of accountability, Minister, when you do receive these funds, what's your plan, and how do you decide who gets assistance?
Well, the Community Development Fund was the brainchild of Honorable Julius Espat from the last administration. It's something he presented in the National Assembly, and it's now coming to fruition, which is an excellent initiative. Every month, each constituency receives $15,000 to do community projects. In particular, Caribbean Shores, we have been rehabilitating Lopez Mateos Park with our first 2 months of the Community Development funds. So we've resurfaced the basketball court. We're putting in goals. We're putting in bleachers. We're putting in swing sets. We're fixing the fence. So it's an overall beautification of Lopez Mateos Park. And I plan to do that with other parks in my constituency as well. But moving now into the month of December, it is well known, Marlene and Isani, that this has been a very difficult year for Belizeans all across the country. And so that particular fund will be increased and not just limited to PUP politicians. It will be for all members of the National Assembly. So members of the United Democratic Party will be receiving the same amount that members of the People's United Party government will be receiving. And so it's very fair when you look at it compared to how they handled it in the past. And I know there is some criticism. I was listening to you guys earlier to say, well, why area representatives? Why not put it through different departments? I think that area representatives know who their people are and know who their people in need are. And they have teams. We all have committees that go out on the ground that can deliver these goods. And at least in my constituency, I don't get the complaint that, oh, I didn't get. We make sure we get to everybody, regardless of red or blue. We do not play politics in Caribbean shores. And so I know for my part, I know there's transparency and accountability. We provide all receipts to the FinSec in terms of the spending of our money. So, and I understand that that is likewise expected of each and every constituency, that they provide these receipts and they provide accountability for this money.
Now, just looking at it from a larger picture here, when you talk about area representatives receiving equal funds, it brings us back to the issue of redistricting. You're talking about violence on the south side. Some of these constituencies will get half in value what your constituencies will have access to, just based on the number of voters that are registered.
And many
will argue that the needs are more.
Yes, but it's not a lot less. They'll be getting a very substantial portion, and it does not, how to say it, it's not reciprocal per se, commensurate. It's actually just a very small dip in the number that they will be getting. So they'll be getting a substantial amount of money to help a very small group of individuals. But like you said, on the south side, where we're targeting, we actually have, as part of our multi-sectoral approach, the issue of grocery bags in these particular communities that we'll be doing on a monthly basis, and that will not be handled by politicians. That will be handled by the Leadership Intervention Unit under the guidance of Mr. William Dawson. And so he knows who the individuals are. And so not only do we get the assistance from area representatives, but we also get the assistance from the Leadership Intervention Unit. So it's a real deliberate, targeted attack that we're doing on the south side of Belize City to uplift the lives of these individuals, like I said, who have been neglected and abandoned for so long.
Is this separate from the Ministry of Human Development program?
Yes,
it sounds like duplication here.
It is. A lot of these individuals don't receive from the Ministry of Human Development. As you know, that number has been cut back over time, but there is a greater need for more grocery bags on the south side of Belize City. Hence the reason why the Leadership Intervention Unit will also be targeting that on the south side as well.
Now, in the interest of time, I do want to move on to new growth for a moment, but just 1 year later, Minister, it definitely is a time where many of the ministers are reflecting on what accomplishments they've made and even acknowledging where they feel they fell short. Let's talk about your analysis as to how you felt you did in your first year.
I believe far better than Jules gave me credit for, I think. Like I said, he didn't give me an F, which is a good thing. And I've said it time and time again that it's going to be a very long journey back. But we have the long-term commitment in place. I've seen where we have made great strides as a department. We're doing an excellent job. And I just want to take the opportunity, because in times like these, when there is low public morale, everybody gangs up. It's like a frenzy. Everybody gangs up on the police department and they cast this brush on everybody. And there are a good 90 to 95% of good, solid, hardworking police officers out there that we are tainting with this brush for no reason, because they're hardworking individuals. And yes, they always say that the good suffer for the bad, but those police officers who are out there on the grind, keeping us safe and secure at night, they deserve our thanks. And as minister, I always tell them, Thank you so much for your hard work that you put in for us Belizeans. And so I can see where we are turning the page, we're turning the corner here as a ministry. And I look forward to 2022 if we can continue with these projects that we're implementing, that it's going to be a much better year compared to this particular year. And when you look at it, Marlene, police officers have been cut 10%. Our ministry has been cut 20%. And even with all of that, the fact that we now have to enforce these statutory, the SIs, the regulations in terms of wearing masks, police officers have added responsibilities, added obligations on them, and they had to deal with the 10% cut, and they're chasing planes at night. Yeah. And when you look at that this year compared to the last 13 years in terms of murders, is better than all those years. So even despite...
Well, you know that's a difficult measure because we have a curfew in place.
We had a curfew in place under the UDP as well, and they actually had a state of emergency for 3 months. They had locked up individuals for 3 months. So there are different things.
But you will accept that perhaps the better measure as to how we're doing is when the countries, when people are allowed to move freely 24/7.
I would want to still differ with you on that, because if somebody wants to commit a crime, they do it before the curfew. They move it up. Trust me, they move it up. Broad daylight killings in some instances. And so I don't necessarily look at the curfew as being any sort of impact on crime per se. But certainly, like you said, maybe a truer picture we can have once the curfew is lifted.
Let me ask a question here. On the 13th of December, if I'm not mistaken, there will be a new measure that will come to force in respect of officers, public officers. I would want to think it includes police officers as well, to be, if not fully vaccinated, at least having had their first shot as a matter of a mandate. Can you speak to us on that from your ministry's perspective?
Yes, we in the police department, we have over 90%, I think it's around 93% receiving the first vaccination. And so the others, I'm sure will be coming along before December 13th. I haven't heard of any police officer deciding that they will give up their job and go home in opposition to or in protest to this particular vaccination. I have not heard that. And so we do feel that by December 13th, we will have our total population vaccinated, at least with the first dose. It's been something that the Ministry of Health has proposed for many months now. I think it was way back in August that they announced that by December 1st, we would hope to have everybody in the public service vaccinated. And so it's just a matter of extending that to December 13th, like you said, to have this vaccination in place.
Yeah. Well, let's take this time before we run completely out of time to focus on the new growth industries, because very early on the conversation got kick-started with marijuana, or I should say cannabis, I'm sorry, and the potential growth we could have in that industry. And things seem to have stalled for a bit. What's happening, Minister?
Some people said we went too fast. Some people say we're going too slow. It's all a matter of perspective, I guess. I like where we are in terms of that legislation. I would have hoped that it would have passed in the Senate. But as far as I'm aware, it now goes to a Senate committee. Yes. that wants to make, I'm told, very minor changes to the legislation. And so it got very good support in the House of Representatives. The Honorable Shine Barrow supported it. The Honorable Tracy Tager-Panton supported it. And I believe to some degree the leader of the opposition also supported it. Because it's a piece of legislation that is necessary given the quandary that we are in. Whereby you can have 10 grams in your possession, but you have to go through a very illicit acquisition all the way from Mexico or the United States of this drugs trafficking illegally through the country before reaching to the individual. And so we're just looking to regulate that industry and to create a new industry for Belize, whereby the government gets its fair share, the business people can get their fair share, and of course incorporating a lot of the existing players in Belize City and other parts of the country, the existing players in the industry. So I'm very optimistic as to where we are, and I think that early on in the new year the legislation should pass, but that does not mean that the next day everybody can grow marijuana. It's not that kind of thing that's happening. And that was one of the concerns raised by the churches when I met with them. They don't want it to be that kind of prevalence, and I understand that fully. Because it still will be illegal for you to smoke out in public. You have to be on somebody's private property, and they have to give you permission in order to smoke on their private property. And so these are the types of things that people have to understand with the industry moving forward come next year. But it's going to take some time. I figure that by the end of next year, we should be seeing some economic benefits for the country.
Do you feel that you have successfully been able to get the Council of Churches on board?
I don't think you could ever get them fully on board, but I will say this. We had an excellent meeting, an excellent engagement, and their biggest concern was we just want a proper education process to kick off, which I have assured them that it will be. And we don't want it to be in the hands of minors, which is why we're saying that in order for you to consume any form of cannabis, you have to have your ID card. And we have moved that age from 18 to 21 years old. And so they were very grateful for that move as well, that we moved it to age 21. So they don't want it in the hands of young people. So that was their big concern. But overall, like I said, it was a very meaningful, productive engagement that we had with all of the bishops present. We had that meeting, I think, in October or September of last year. Excellent meeting. But obviously, they can't come out and say, we will support this thing. It hasn't been done. But in other countries, the churches actually do not object to it either. In the United States, there's not an opposition coming out from the churches. But we are a more conservative society, so it is expected here.
And while the reframing of the legislation continues in the Senate, what's happening on the ground in looking at who will be the players involved? The last conversation we had about this, we talked about looking at cooperatives or community groups getting involved in the business, and how do you equalize it with investors?
Yeah, it's going to be a particular balance that we'll have to strike, Marlene. Like I said, we have to find a way to incorporate the existing players in the industry, especially as dispensaries moving forward. They may not necessarily have the know-how when it comes to cultivation, because there is an art and a science when it comes to cultivation. But those individuals who are currently dealing, so to speak, we can certainly incorporate them as dispensaries. So moving forward, we have to have the cooperative mindset when it comes to cultivators, as well as those players in the dealing that we incorporate them as well. So it's hard to say who all will be players. I could tell you that hundreds, if not thousands, of individuals have come to me saying they want to get into it. They don't have any they don't have any experience in it, but they want to get into it. So there's a lot of excitement, and that's a wonderful thing. But we certainly have to create some sort of balance moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, Minister, you know, if we learn from Jamaica, there are lots of people who see green, not necessarily marijuana, but dollar signs, who want to get involved. But there has been an unofficial industry, illegal as of today, that's been working behind the scenes. And in Jamaica, for example, we know that the challenge they faced was that it was foreigners that came in that did most of the investment, because there is a cost associated. Licensing will have to be very strict, which will also have a cost, which boxes out a lot of your main players currently.
Well, that's the whole point of having the social equity license. We will, of course, have the big licenses, but of course, for the small farmers, we have to have a social equity license. And that is one of the aspects of our legislation that other jurisdictions are saying, see, we didn't do that with our legislation. And a lot of the small farmers were boxed out. And so they are lauding our legislation to recognize that that's an important aspect, to include the farmers who are currently involved, to have them fall under this social equity license. So that is something that the experts per se in Jamaica, I've been in touch with a lot of them, especially in the Rastafarian community, who have said this is an excellent thing that you're doing here in Belize. So I look forward to definitely having that aspect come to light.
Would the social equity license include the other small players, not necessarily the farmers, but those who will be selling? Because at this point, you don't go to a wholesaler to buy a catch. You go to your door on the street corner or whatsoever, and he's a small player at that point. Does a social equity license include these individuals? If you're looking at creating a level playing field for the big investors and, of course, the small retailers.
100% Isani. When you think of the social equity license, you have to factor in that currently all of the dealers in Belize City and other parts of the country are importing marijuana from Mexico and the United States. It cannot be a situation where we will have those individuals compete with Belizean grown marijuana. And so the dispensary issue will have to go out to all of these current players. And so we have to set up that structure moving forward. It has to be a structure of accountability, though. It cannot be that you will not pay your taxes. And so if it is that you're going to set up shop in your communities, you have to understand fully that you will not be importing marijuana from Mexico and the United States any longer. You can only sell locally grown marijuana in your communities. And of course, you have to pay your fair share of taxes. Those are three essential components. And of course, there has to be, the crime has to be tied to that as well. Yeah. There has to be a continued commitment that we will not be pursuing this criminal activity. No more guns on the streets, no more killing one another over turf wars, because that could affect your license if it is that a particular dispensary is warring with, and that could definitely upend your license and have it cancelled. And so moving forward, that is something as minister that actually triggered me to say this is something that we need to solve in Belize City, because it has been a source of such warfare for so long. But at the same time, we have to put in place measures to ensure that we can all get along, get a piece of the pie. Everybody can be a part of it, but at the same time, they have to respect each other and they have to pay their fair share of taxes.
Now, the cannabis conversation has kind of usurped the entire concept of new growth in industries, but surely the ideas go beyond that.
Yes.
Tell us about other things that are emerging.
Well, excitingly, we have, of course, the National Cahoon Industry, which is the brainchild of Mr. Rudy Castillo. That is certainly in its infancy. We're putting all the operating structures in place, setting up a working group of all the ministries coming together to assist this particular project. And then, of course, we have another exciting project, which I hope to be released next year, along with Tesla Foundation, in terms of the construction of energy efficient homes. With this Blue Bond achievement and with the Nature Conservancy, Belize has been getting a lot of attention worldwide for our best practices when it comes to saving the environment. And so we've attracted groups like Tesla Foundation who want to use Belize as a hub to build these energy efficient homes, whether they're low income or middle income homes. And there is tied to it an entire educational aspect. And so when they come in, it's just not to build homes. They're going to build a school to teach young people how to build these energy efficient homes. So there's an entire process tied to this. And of course, if it takes off, we can then supply homes to Central America and to the Caribbean on the CARICOM. So that's an exciting new initiative. And we're also at the moment looking at bamboo industry. And we've met with a group, I think about 4 weeks ago, the Minister of Agriculture and myself met with a group that is looking to hire or contract out to small farmers 25,000 acres to do bamboo farming in Belize. So small farmers will be able to benefit from the growth of the bamboos and then taking it to the manufacturing mill where it will be processed there, which will then be converted into tissue. So it's a lot of exciting new opportunities on the horizon for new growth industries. But like you said, oftentimes it gets bogged down in cannabis conversation.
It becomes a cannabis portfolio, no?
Yes.
All right, and of course, anything else you'd like to share with our viewers before we close?
Well, I just want to take the opportunity, Marlene, I'm actually wearing red today, sitting in front of the Christmas tree, to wish all my constituents in Caribbean shores, and of course, all of Belize and the diaspora, a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Well, we thank you for coming in to have this conversation today.
And thank you for having me.
All right, we're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be hearing from Beltrade about Belize's participation in Expo Dubai. Please stay tuned.
For the price, but stay for the service.